We've had a line today of extremely distinguished speakers, and I'm especially pleased to welcome Simon Heffer, who is one of the most distinguished Conservative with a small c commentators in the British media today. I'm a great admirer of his work. I am a regular reader of his column in the Sunday Telegraph, and I have to tell you, I quote him constantly. One of my favourite lines is, "The reason we have an underclass is because we have decided to pay for one." And I've rarely heard quite so much wisdom in so few words. I also have to apologise to Simon, because he was previously speaking at the Bruges Group meeting and was astonished to find that I and my colleague Dan Hannam were not there, so I apologise for that. In fact, we had advised the Bruges Group some 2 weeks in advance that we would not be able, after all, to attend, and I'm sorry they didn't make that clearer to the people who were attending the meeting, so I apologise that you were placed in that rather unexpected situation. But never mind, we'll invite Simon to speak to us for 15-20 minutes, and then in the remainder of the time available to us, we'll take questions from the floor. Simon.
Thank you. Roger, thank you very much indeed for that warm introduction. I always wanted to meet my reader, and now I have, and I'm very proud to have you. You mentioned earlier your inability to attend the Bruges Group meeting, which I know was not because Dave Cameron had told you not to, or anyone of his officers told you not to, but I thought that the fact that you and Dan Hannam were asked, I think, by colleagues not to turn up today to share a platform with Nigel Farage and me was indicative of one of the really deep-seated problems in the Conservative Party, a party which I was always brought up to believe was, to use a horrible cliche, a broad church. It's a pretty narrow church at the moment. It's a very narrow church that has a rather authoritarian interpretation of its Bible and its prayer book, and no one is really welcome to veer outside that. And I find this rather distressing, because even though when I was younger we had people like Ted Heath running the Tory party, and Ted Heath was not a man with whom I feel I have very much politically in common, and I'm sure most of you don't either. He was a man who didn't go to the lengths that the modern Conservative Party does to squash dissent. If he had done, Enoch Powell would have been thrown out of the Conservative Party long before he went of his own accord in 1974. And although some pretty brutal tactics were used to get the second reading of the European Communities Bill through in the winter of 1972, there was no doubt that those who in the end voted against it on the Conservative benches had a secure place in Parliament for as long as their constituencies chose to re-adopt them, and for as long as their electorate chose to re-elect them. That isn't the case today. And I've been really quite deeply distressed, not just during the Cameron regime, but in the regime that preceded it, by this shocking authoritarianism and this shocking determination to limit freedom of speech in the Conservative Party. I can remember that Friday afternoon in the spring of 2005. I was driving to pick up my son from a friend's house, and I got a call on my mobile telephone in my car from the BBC, who said, "Can we talk to you about Howard Flight?" And I said, "Well, yes, why?" And the woman at the other end said, "Well, as you will have heard," I hadn't heard, and I was having a day off, he has been removed from his position as the Progressive Parliamentary candidate because he had advocated tax cuts. And I said to this woman, "You are joking, this is a wind-up, you cannot be serious." And I genuinely thought she was just taking the mickey out of me, but as we know, it wasn't the case. And I must say, I don't think anything that's happened in the Conservative Party has shocked me quite so much as what happened to Howard Flight. This wasn't a man who got up and rabble-roused. He didn't get up and advocate the commission of criminal offences. He didn't, I think, actually say anything that wasn't believed in by most Conservatives. He just got up and said that he thought it would be a good idea to cut taxes. He said it at a private meeting where he was disgracefully recorded, and it was leaked outside against the assurances that he had at this private dinner that it didn't happen. And Howard, who then led the party, was determined to make an example of him, and removed him not just from his candidacy, but of course from a part of his livelihood. He was a Member of Parliament, and he had every right to believe that he would stay as such. I think 2 or 3 weeks earlier, there was the less publicised case of Danny Kruger, who was removed from his candidacy in an unwinnable seat in the north of England, for having said something that upset Polly Toynbee. Polly Toynbee wrote that Kruger had said various things about the need to cut public spending and to have a bit of structural unemployment in the public sector. She had gone ballistic about this, and Kruger had been removed from his seat because Kruger was not an MP and not a very high-profile figure. This seemed to pass largely unnoticed. It was reported in the press, my newspaper certainly wrote about it, but there was no great head of steam. But what happened to Howard Flight a few weeks later, I think, was far worse, because he was an MP, he had the support of his constituents, there was no question, but that he would be re-elected at that election. And the leader of the Conservative Party took it on himself centrally to tell the local association that in breach of all custom and practice they were going to be deprived of him as their candidate. And this struck me as being absolutely monstrous. Now, as we know, the Conservative Party lost that election quite heavily again, and the example that was made of Howard Flight didn't seem to make any odds at all. But it certainly seemed to send a message around most parliamentary Conservative members of the parliamentary party that they were not at liberty to speak their mind. And while there have always been certain limits on that, no one expects a Member of Parliament to get up, say something thoroughly outrageous by any normal sense of the term, and be allowed to retain his credibility or sometimes his seat. To get up and advocate tax cuts hardly comes under that heading. Since Cameron took over the Tory party, things appear to have got slightly worse. It's not just enough to be thrown out for advocating tax cuts. Even getting up and talking about events in the past in a way that doesn't chime with the Cameron take on political history goes down very badly. That's why Nigel Hastellow was thrown out of his candidacy near here for saying Enoch Powell was right. It was why Philip Lardner very nearly lost his candidacy in Scotland for saying that Powell was right about his warnings about immigration, and also for saying, and I think it's an even more unanswerable truth, that Ian Smith was a slightly better man to have in charge of Zimbabwe than Robert Mugabe. Now, when we get to the stage that the expression of entirely reasonable and legal opinions, and I do believe that both of those opinions are entirely reasonable and they're certainly legal, is going to result in punishment and the removal of someone from the Conservative Party's candidates list or from a specific candidacy, that is absolutely deplorable. In the same way that the Conservative Party, or certain MEPs in the Conservative Party, lent on Roger and on Dan Hannan not to come and join me at the Bruce Group meeting earlier today. There is a determination that there will not be a debate on certain issues. There is a determination that anybody who says anything that can possibly be interpreted as being from the Tory party of many years ago, i.e. slightly right-wing, those kind of people have to be thrown out. And it is terribly detrimental to the intellectual growth of the Conservative Party for this to happen, because it is like a form of Sovietisation. It is saying that the leader, or the faceless advertising gurus who advise the leader, have got their view on what the party's policy should be on certain issues, and anybody who chooses to gainsay that policy can have no place in the Conservative Party. That has never ever been how the party has worked. To try and create a party that is full of clones of the leader and the advertising men who advise him is maybe, they think, a way to win the election. To my mind, it's a way of closing down the credibility of the Conservative Party once and for all. And I was particularly outraged, as speaking as Enoch Powell's official biographer, that both Mr. Hastellow and Mr. Lardner should have been vilified by people in the Conservative Party for saying that Powell was right to warn, as he did 40 years ago, about the consequences of mass immigration.